to week 5. We are happy to take the class from Cubism to the pure abstract. We have learned that Cubism was caught between abstraction and illusion, that Cubism was essentially a flat surface covered with colors, assembled in a certain order. This open form brought forth a new language, one where the art now disengages itself entirely from visual references, but does not lose its flexibility and power. Here are the questions covered for week 5. How did Cubism impact the development of various abstract art movements in the early 20th century? What are the major tenets of futurist art? What are the premises of various branches of abstract art, such as suprematism, Gestalt, and constructivism? Here is the vocabulary that will be covered for this week. Lingua franca, a common language between speakers whose languages are different. Prune, a series of abstract geometric paintings developed by Russian artist Eli Liszewski. Gestalt, a Dutch artistic movement founded in 1917 in Leiden. Neoplasticism, geometric style of concrete art developed by the Dutch painter Piet Mondrian just after the First World War. Biomorphism, a painted, drawn, or sculptured free form or design suggestive in shape of a living organism. Cubism explored different media and abstract forms, and so opened the way to non-figurative art. It focuses on different angles of representation and the surface of the canvas. Abstract artists took this experiment and made even more simplified shapes, searching for the purest elements of the form. Space became part of the sculpture, and other movements followed, such as suprematism and constructivism. It is always interesting to note the artists that spur on new ideas, and both Delaunay and Kupka helped push forward the abstract. Leaning on the principles of Cubism, emphasized geometric form, lines, and simplified composition, these two artists brought color back to the monochromatic. They borrowed from the Cubists their triangular and circular forms to discuss the pleasures of modern life and its technological innovations. Abstract artists celebrated the simplicity, anonymity, and functionality of modernism. Remember, this was a transformative time, one of war and destruction, but also one of extraordinary innovation. Electricity, X-ray, automobiles, and airplanes were invented at the turn of the century. This was sure to influence and inspire the art world. At this time, Italy trailed behind France, Britain, and Germany, both technologically and artistically. Europe associated Italy with its history. Out of this dust, the futurists emerged. They were passionate, young, rebellious artists that set out to revel in the modern. Filippo Tommaso Marinetti was the leader and launched a manifesto in 1909 that detailed the tenets of futurism. The tenets are summarized as: all forms of imitation must be despised. It is essential to rebel against harmony and good taste. Art critics are useless and harmful. All subjects previously used are no more, replaced with modern life, steel, and speed. The term madman should be a title of honor. Vigorous activity and progress should be demonstrated. Rendering nature should be sincere and pure. Movement and light come before human form. Bacchiani, a futurist painter, was also a significant sculptor. Unique forms of continuity in space meshes human form with the power and speed usually associated with a machine. Bacchiani believed that sculpture should open to integrate light rays and force necessary to imply movement. Balla's painting follows the Cubism method of geometric shapes, transparent overlapping layers of gouache, and captures the dynamic rhythm of nature. The painting is most importantly a depiction of movement, rather than a physical object. Progressive Russian painters were inspired by the Cubist movement. They catapulted their innovative art into minimal art and color-filled painting. Significant contributors by women artists were Popova and Goncharova. Here we can see Kazimir Malkovich's The Black Square, 1915, the catalyst into non-objectivity. Malkovich's desire was to abandon all reference to the natural world, to free art of a materialistic society and constitute through geometric shapes. He revisits the marks of primitive man and creates feeling rather than ornamental work. A suprematist painter was no longer required to observe or touch, but to feel. Influenced by geometric shapes of Cubism and ideas of spirituality from abstract art, the group de Stael, or known as the Style, led by Pierre Mondrian, created new representation of space with simple lines and shapes. Although referred by Cubism, Mondrian rejected the Cubism idea of expression of reality, which he thought Cubist artists did not accept, creating artworks with partially abstract forms, but also with some objective forms. Mondrian's artworks had individualistic ideas of expression based on the modern view of mass production, linked with a constructive look that also influenced architecture and machine-age aesthetics. Mondrian had a process where he started with horizontal and vertical lines, forming squares and painting in grays, shadows of red, yellow, and blue. Later, he simplified the grids and used primary colors and pure white, creating a systematic idea of aesthetics. One of the main characteristics of Mondrian's work, also seen in other abstract artists, was the idea of giving order to a declining social life. The ideal art, as Mondrian proposed, was neoplasticism, the use of simple elements in their purest state, such as horizontal and vertical lines, squares, rectangles, and primary colors. In his essay, Neoplasticism in Pictorial Art, he wrote, "As a pure representation of the human mind, art will express itself in an aesthetically purified, that is to say, abstract form. The new plastic idea cannot, therefore, take the form of a natural or concrete representation. This new plastic idea will ignore the particulars of appearance, that is to say, natural form and color." De Stael had a huge impact on the development of products for architecture, interiors, and different home objects that we still see now. However, this style has been extremely popularized, losing the uniqueness and the authenticity of its elements, with exception of some artists that, inspired by it, could create great pieces of architecture, as we can see in Mies van der Rohe and Richard Meier constructions. The combination of the arts, as Mondrian dreamed, was achieved with the development of this style that impacted environmental design. Between 1918 and 1939, sculpture took abstraction as the main influence for its artworks, developing emphasis in biomorphism, such as patterns or shapes from nature and living organism seen in Hans Arp's works, and pure geometric forms as we seen on de Stael creations. Constructivism was created in Russia, while abstraction was the main interest for artists that wanted to change a corrupted society. With an appreciation for science and technology, constructivism used symbolic forms in relation with space, but generated rejection from the Soviet regime that supported only socialist realism. Naum Gabo used the new and stronger transparent plastic to create form in 3D space. He took advantage of the transparent material, which transmitted light to emphasize the emotion, which he wanted to share with the viewers. Antoine Petzner, Gabo's brother, preferred to work on metal instead of plastic to create intricate and complicated sculptures. The curving sheets and the spiral egg motifs with the reflected lights from the metal depicts the growth concept of cells and the dynamicism of energy. Some points of interest for abstraction in Great Britain are vorticism, angular, diagonal, and harsh, as seen in Wyndham Lewis's arts, integrated futurism and cubism to achieve more ideal and classical abstract, created a new tendency of halfway between surrealism and abstraction, as seen in Henry Moore's work, interested in meanings of natural forms and shapes, found the rhythmical relation between negative and positive areas, whole, became an important form which could carried deep meaning in art, as seen in Moore's sculptures, Barbara Hepworth's abstract. Even though the term vorticism was meant to suggest a powerful whirling force, absorbing and synthesizing the positive elements in the chaos of modernist theories, the images in the artworks of the vorticists were not circular, but angular, diagonal, and harsh. Henry Moore's work is halfway between surrealism and abstraction. He created human forms that also suggested natural landscape as well as the idea of fertility. He demonstrated the rhythmical relation between the negative and positive areas. This idea is still emphasized in modern design today. Hepworth experimented with the whole, which became the hallmark of her art. She also liked to color the interior of her circular shells. Like Henry Moore, who was committed to the truth of materials, Hepworth was passionate of both nature and the nature of the materials. The Bauhaus movement evinced the lingua franca of the time. While we see Bauhaus the building as a uniquely diverse architectural work that represented a modern German arts, architecture, and design school, the Bauhaus as a movement was also quite motley. Walter Gropius, founder and director of the Bauhaus, designed the school as you can see it photographed here. The overarching spirit of the time beyond these walls was pioneered by modern renegades passionate about the fantasy of abstract surrealism and the geometric vocabulary of cubism, the absorption in science, engineering, and the new industrial materials of constructivism. The synthesis of these things birthed this artistic powerhouse, noted in the very ideals of the Bauhaus, which sought to reconcile art and design to the machine age. But the story did not begin with a building. The Bauhaus goal to marry arts and crafts into a new industrial design aesthetic included everything from weaving to experimental films, electrical appliances to furniture, architecture, and of course, painting. Fernand Léger's Three Women serves as a fine example of what this new industrial aesthetic represented in painting and what it anticipated as the movement developed. Although made the same year as Picasso's Three Musicians, and although we still see similarities between the two works, note the grand scale, the mural-inspired flatness, and the hints of classical theme, the machine age inspiration within Léger's Three Women is easy to spot. Léger himself was only one among the masses who found themselves craving aesthetics that were rooted in a philosophically pure, machine-inspired art. Purists Amédée aux Enfants and Charles-Édouard Jeanneret, aka the architect Le Corbusier, decidedly broke away from Cubism, which had, according to them, fallen into a state of mere decoration. Their campaign, funneled into a vision they captured in After Cubism and written in 1918, represented a broader effort to revive a healthy art that captured the spirit of the age, a spirit inspired by the precision of the machine in which form would follow function. Aux Enfants captured this spirit in his painting The Vases. Visually, the flat but functional geometric forms stand stoic in their abstraction. They are composed of almost muted colors, all the while being arranged in a synthetic Cubism-inspired way. In addition, The Vases gives us a taste of the purest impulse to establish visual conventions for painting based upon machine design and manufactured objects of common use, which was what was ultimately institutionalized by the Bauhaus curriculum. Although the Bauhaus school closed in 1933 after receiving intense pressure from the radical right-wing parties of Germany, its collaborators continued to influence the history of art. The faculty and key figures at the Bauhaus included the likes of Kandinsky, Klee, L. Lidzitsky, Moholy Nagy, and Albers. By bringing constructivist doctrine, suprematism, and Gestalt into conversation with each other, El Lissitzky is one example of an artist whose influence did not dwindle at the school's closure. Many of his works center around the emphasis he felt upon Praum, art as a changing place between architecture and painting, which we can note here in his 1925 work. Another key figure, Joseph Albers, was said to focus more intently on optical illusions while maintaining tight geometric forms, rendered here as a glass painting in pillars. It has been said that Laszlo Macaulay McGee had an influence second only to the founder Walter Gropius. Gropius aided in the crystallization of a redirection in the experimentation of the aesthetics at the institution. Macaulay McGee taught in controlled laboratory exercises where more objective and rationalist approaches were used. This shift illustrated his keen insight into the value of employing modern technology combined with industrial materials. Here we see his light space modulator, which emanates his constructive influences. Also, his endeavors to publish 14 Bauhaus books with Gropius exemplified his ability to theorize the movement of which he was a part. In the published works were Klee, Gropius, and Mondrian. And we remember that it was Mondrian who sought to capture the indefinable but realizable in plastics by way of balanced, rhythmic, non-figurative works of art. It has been said that Mondrian's very theories drenched in philosophical and religious Platonic ideals of theosophy, were so influential they helped to garner the abstraction creation group. What began as a kind of underground movement that continued to create abstract art after Hitler rose to power was the Abstraction Creation Group, with every brand of modernism and every major artist under its canopy. It was unique in that the organic and geometric were married in the abstract. Artists were inspired to go the whole way in abandoning indefinable subject matter. It is clear that although this movement appears only as an honorable mention, it serves rather to illustrate the monumental influence the Bauhaus had on European modern art and across the pond to the United States. The USA was perhaps the most influenced in terms of theory and design, countless art schools and their curricula, as well as a general revival toward the traditions of the brilliant abstract, all thanks to the Bauhaus movement. We will now review the prompt questions. Prompt question number 1. How did Cubism impact the development of various abstract art movements in the early 20th century? Cubism developed further in France and abroad. Cubism sparked several key foreign movements, each had its own objectives. Each was unique with its own character. The major Cubist-inspired movements took place in Italy, Germany, England, and Russia. We will now take a closer look at each of the countries listed. Cubism in France and Orphism. While we know the Spaniard Juan Gris to be the artist often credited with developing a further abstract cubism with light and color, it was Frenchmen Robert Delaunay and Czech Frank Kupka, who all worked in Paris, that fused the spectrum of colors of Fauvism with Cubist design and created the pure color abstraction that Apollinaire later called Orphism. Their representations of modern life by way of softer, melted edges of form and of energetic, dynamic color abstractions were echoed and explored also by the likes of Fernand Léger in Three Women. Léger utilized his Cubist influence to render paintings with figures and forms composed of machine parts. While Léger approached the machine age with a softness and mood, it was Marcel Duchamp whose nude descending the staircase suggests a rather forceful machine influence in otherwise Cubist-inspired conventions. Outside of Paris, the Cubist influence resonated in other varying degrees. Cubism in Italy. In Italy, the Cubist influence gave rise to the Futurists, who had previously exhibited with the Cubists. This friendship, which began in 1912, helped to establish the Italians' innovation, which centered on art that evoked speed, violence, dynamic movement, and the passage of time. Key to this movement was their ideological father, Filippo Tommaso Marinetti, an Italian poet who penned the turbulent Futurist manifesto to paper. By denouncing their Italian artistic roots, the Futurists favored art that suggested their liberation from the past and presence in the modern, urban world at large. Giacomo Balla's Dynamicism of a Dog on a Leash evinces the movement's furious favoring of dynamic motion while also suggesting its development into a more light-hearted subject matter. Cubism in Russia. Unlike the Italians, who sought to cut off their art historical past, the Russians' Cubist heritage came to life in its nationalist purpose. The Russians desired a purely Russian art based on Russian sources. A band of visionaries, the Russians evinced their Cubist roots to transform not only their art, but their state structure. This avant-garde dissemination in a formerly ancient Russia came to life as the artists carried the Cubist concepts to their very conclusion, a feat not completed by the founders of the movement. From clearly Cubo-Futurist works like The Traveler by Popova from 1915 to Vladimir Ova's seemingly simple abstract works, Russia demonstrated the many varying effects of Cubism in just one country. Cubism in the Netherlands. Reconciling the findings of Cubism with the machine age aesthetic, de Stael gave meaning to both art and design, and Piet Mondrian and his influential theoretical developments, neoplasticism and utopian social order. By tracing the developments of Mondrian, we can note an indisputable Cubist influence in the forms and space of the geometrically inclined earlier painting of Flowering Apple Tree of 1912, on over to that which was the plastic and pure reality expressed in composition with red, blue, and yellow of 1930. The later work brought to fruition the modern age of standardization and the machine products, in the simplified line and rectangular grid patterns we see to the right. Truly, the fine arts design and architecture brought to life in de Stael works of art influenced modernity, and no other Cubist-rooted movement. The role of art was changed forever. Let's review the tenets of the Futurists by looking at this Futurist classic. It was painted by Luigi Russolo and is titled The Dynamicism of a Car. This work is clearly an original. It rebels against harmony and standards of good taste. The subject is steel and speed, and its force is vigorous. Only the idea of wind in nature is represented, and the human form has been replaced with movement and light. Last, it is important to note that these passionate painters were often considered an offshoot of Cubism, but they were more closely aligned with the German Expressionists. Question 3. What were the premises of various branches of abstract art such as suprematism, de Stael, and constructivism? A review of suprematism, the catalyst into non-objectivity, abandon all reference to the natural world, to free art of a materialistic society, revisit the marks of primitive man, creates feeling rather than ornamental work, no longer required to observe or touch, but to feel. Here is a review of de Stael. Prominent geometric shapes of Cubism, ideas of spirituality from abstract art, all the way down to influenced architecture and machine age aesthetics. A review of constructivism. Constructivism was created in Russia. Abstraction was the main interest for artists that wanted to change a corrupt society. An appreciation for science and technology use symbolic forms in relation with space. Here are our sources. Thank you so much, and we look forward to the discussion.